The first thing my wife said after waking from the accident was, "Why is everyone lying to me?" I was standing beside her hospital bed with a paper cup of cold coffee in my hand. Her sister was crying in the corner. Her mother was praying. Her father was demanding to know when the doctor would let us take her home. And I was the only person in the room who knew that my wife had every reason to ask that question. 3 days earlier, a delivery truck had run a red light and smashed into her car at an intersection. She survived, barely. The doctors called it a miracle. But when she opened her eyes, they discovered something stranger. She could hear things she shouldn't have been able to hear. Not voices from far away. Not thoughts. Sounds. Tiny sounds. A heartbeat changing when someone lied. A swallow when someone hid something. The faint tremor in a person's breathing when they were afraid. The doctor said it could be a temporary neurological effect from the trauma. They told us not to panic. My wife, Elena, nodded quietly. Then her mother leaned over her bed and said, "Sweetheart, don't worry. Everything is fine now." Elena looked at her. A faint, almost confused smile appeared on her face. Then she said, "Mom, your heart just sped up." Her mother froze. I felt the cold coffee cup slip slightly in my fingers. Elena looked toward me. "And yours too." I didn't answer. Because mine had. Not because I was lying. Because I suddenly remembered everything I had failed to tell her. For 6 years, Elena and I had been married. I had loved her since the first year we met, when she was working late at a small architectural studio, and I brought her dinner because she'd forgotten to eat. She had laughed when she saw the cheap noodles. "You're terrible at romance." I didn't bring romance, I told her. I brought carbohydrates. She laughed so hard that she nearly spilled her coffee. That laugh became my favorite sound in the world. We married 2 years later. Elena had always been brilliant. She could look at an empty piece of land and imagine a building that made people stop and stare. But she never trusted her own talent. Her family constantly reminded her that her younger sister, Vivian, was more practical. Vivian had a polished business degree. Elena had sketches. Vivian knew investors. Elena knew how to turn sunlight into architecture. And somehow, in that family, the first mattered more. I was the one who kept telling Elena she would build something of her own someday. I believed it, even when she didn't. Then, 6 months before the accident, everything changed. Elena's father offered her a position in the family development company. He said it was an opportunity. I knew better. It was a test. He wanted Elena to design a luxury residential project for the company. Vivian was supposed to handle the business side. Elena worked for 4 months without sleeping properly. She designed an entire housing concept around passive cooling, recycled materials, and modular construction. It was beautiful. More importantly, it was affordable. She called it the Haven Project. One night, she spread the drawings across her dining table. "What do you think?" I stared at them. "I think you're going to change people's lives." She smiled. "Do you really believe that? I married you, didn't I?" She threw a cushion at me. For a while, I thought everything was finally going right. Then Vivian began attending Elena's meetings. Then Elena stopped receiving emails from investors. Then her father started saying things like, "Maybe this project is too ambitious." And one evening, Elena came home pale. "Dad wants Vivian to present the project." I looked up. "Your project?" She nodded. "He says Vivian can explain the financial side better." "What about your design?" "He'll introduce it as a family collaboration." I knew exactly what that meant. Elena was being pushed aside. I told her to fight. She shook her head. "It's my family." And that was always Elena's weakness. She could defend everyone except herself. So I stayed quiet. I thought patience would protect our marriage. I thought if I stood beside her long enough, she would eventually stand up for herself. I was wrong, because the betrayal that followed was worse than losing a project. It was discovering that the people Elena trusted had been using her work without her knowledge. And somehow, I had been the last person she suspected. The morning after Elena woke up, the doctors ran test after test. Her hearing was normal. Her vision was normal. Her memory was intact. But something in the way her brain processed sound had changed. The neurologist called it heightened auditory sensitivity. Elena called it a curse. By noon, she had already discovered that nurses whispered about patients outside their rooms, that doctor sighed before delivering bad news, and that her mother made a strange clicking sound with her tongue whenever she was about to tell a half-truth. Then Vivian arrived. She entered the room carrying flowers. "Look at you," she said brightly, "still causing everyone trouble." Elena smiled. Vivian kissed her forehead. "I was terrified." Elena stared at her. Then she quietly asked, "Were you?" Vivian's smile disappeared for half a second. "I was." Elena tilted her head. "You're lying." The room went silent. Vivian laughed nervously. "What? You weren't terrified." "I absolutely was." "You were worried," Elena said. "But not for me." Vivian looked at me. I could see the question in her eyes. What does she know? Elena didn't explain. She simply turned toward the window. That was the first moment I realized the accident had changed more than her hearing. It had changed her willingness to accept explanations. That evening, after everyone left, she asked me to close the door. "Tell me something." "What? Did Vivian take my Haven project?" I felt my stomach tighten. I had known about the presentation. I had known Vivian was preparing to pitch Elena's designs to investors. But I had never told Elena. I had convinced myself I was protecting her from stress. That excuse sounded pathetic now. "Elena," her face became still. "Did she?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You knew." "I sat beside her." "I knew she was presenting it. And you didn't tell me. I thought your father would fix it." She opened her eyes. "You thought. I didn't want you fighting with your family while you were already under pressure." She laughed once. There was no humor in it. "You didn't want me fighting with them." She looked toward the window. "You wanted peace." I couldn't deny it. Because she was right. I had always been the peacemaker. Where her father criticized her, I changed the subject. When Vivian mocked her, I told Elena to ignore it. When her mother compared the sisters, I told Elena that family arguments weren't worth destroying her happiness over. I thought I was protecting our marriage. But sometimes peace is just another word for silence. And I'd asked Elena to stay silent too many times. 2 days later, something happened that finally broke her. Her father visited. He brought paperwork. "It's simple," he said. "Sign this authorization and Vivian can finalize the Haven presentation." Elena read the first page, then the second, then the third. Her face slowly changed. "What is this?" Her father avoided her eyes. "Standard company authorization. This transfers design ownership. It doesn't transfer ownership permanently. It says my name can be removed." He sighed. "Elena, don't make this difficult." She looked at me. I could hear her breathing change. Then she looked back at her father. "You already signed a project away." Her father said nothing. She turned another page. There it was. A preliminary agreement with an investor. The Haven project was already being presented as Vivian's concept. Elena's fingers trembled. Her father finally spoke. "Vivian is better suited to lead this." That sentence hurt more than the paperwork. Not because it was cruel, because Elena had spent her entire life trying to prove she was good enough for him. And now he was telling her she wasn't. She looked at me. I stepped forward. "Elena, we can fight this." She stared at me for a long time. Then she asked, "Will you?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. She nodded slowly. "I thought so." That night, she didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't ask me to comfort her. She simply removed her wedding ring and placed it on the bedside table. I stared at it. "Elena." She shook her head. "Don't. What are you doing?" "I don't know yet." She looked at the ring. "But for the first time, I think I'm finally going to listen to what people are actually saying." Outside the hospital window, rain began tapping against the glass. And for the first time in 6 years, I realized my wife wasn't afraid of losing her family anymore. She was afraid of losing herself. Elena left the hospital 5 days later. She didn't come home with me. That was the first decision she made that I didn't try to change. I drove her to a small apartment near the river, a place her company had once rented for visiting architects. Her father owned it, but Elena had permission to stay there while she recovered. Before she got out of the car, she looked at me. "You're not coming upstairs." I gripped the steering wheel. "Can we talk? We've been talking for 6 years. I mean, honestly." She gave me a tired smile. "Then maybe start with yourself." She shut the door. I watched her disappear into the building. For 3 nights, I slept alone in our house. I expected her to call. She didn't. I expected her to ask about her clothes. She didn't. I expected anger. There was none. That frightened me more than anger would have. Because anger meant she still wanted something from me. Silence meant she was already letting go. Meanwhile, her family assumed the problem would disappear. Her mother called me. She'll calm down. I said nothing. Her father said, "Don't encourage her independence right now." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, "What do you mean?" "She needs stability." But what he meant was obedience. Vivian was already preparing the Haven Project presentation. 3 days after Elena left, the presentation was held at the family company's headquarters. I wasn't invited. Neither was Elena. But I knew someone who had been. Her old professor, Mr. Hale. He called me that evening. "You need to know what happened." "What?" Vivian presented Elena's entire concept. My stomach tightened. How did the investors react? They loved it. That should have hurt. Instead, I felt something colder. "What else?" Mr. Hale hesitated. "They asked why Elena wasn't there. And your father-in-law said she was recovering and had agreed to let Vivian lead." I closed my eyes. Elena hadn't agreed to anything. That night, I went to her apartment. She opened the door before I knocked twice. "You heard about the presentation," she said. I nodded. "I did." She stepped aside. Her apartment was almost empty. Boxes were stacked against the wall. "You're moving?" "Yes." "Where?" "I don't know yet." I looked at the boxes. "What are you packing?" "Things that are mine." There was something strangely peaceful about the way she said it. No accusation. No tears. She picked up a framed photograph from a shelf. It was from our wedding. I remembered that day immediately. Elena had been so nervous that morning she couldn't eat. Before walking down the aisle, she'd whispered, "What if I make the wrong choice?" I had told her, "Then we'll make mistakes together." Now she looked at that photograph and smiled sadly. "I believed you. I still mean it." She turned toward me. "Do you?" I couldn't answer. She put the photograph into a box. Then she said something that I still remember. "I don't think you betrayed me because you wanted to hurt me." I looked at her. "That doesn't make it better." "No." Her voice softened. "You betrayed me because keeping me happy was easier than standing beside me." That sentence destroyed every excuse I had. I sat down. I was scared. "Of what?" "Losing your family." She shook her head. "No. You were scared of losing the version of our life that was comfortable." I had no defense. She continued packing. Then she suddenly stopped. Her head tilted slightly. "Your phone." "What?" "You're getting a message." I looked at my pocket. My phone vibrated. I pulled it out. It was from Vivian. "Don't tell Elena about the original investor file." Elena stared at my screen. Neither of us spoke. She held out her hand. "Give me the phone." I did. She read the message twice. Then she looked at me. "What original investor file?" "I don't know." But her eyes narrowed. "You're lying." I froze. She could hear it. Not the words. The fear underneath them. For the first time, Elena understood that the betrayal around her was much larger than a stolen project. And I understood something worse. Vivian had just made a mistake. She had given Elena a reason to stop trusting everyone. The next morning, Elena went to the company. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. I followed from a distance. Not because she asked me to, because I finally understood that standing beside her didn't always mean speaking for her. Sometimes it meant simply being there. She entered the office at 9. The receptionist stood up. "Mrs. Vale, your father isn't expecting you." "I know. Should I call him?" "No." Elena walked straight toward the conference room. Inside, Vivian was meeting 2 investors. Her father was there too. The moment Elena entered, everyone stopped talking. Her father frowned. "You shouldn't be here." Elena smiled. "It's my project." Vivian stood. "Elena, you're still recovering." "I know. You need rest." "I've been resting for 6 days." Her father stepped forward. "This isn't appropriate." Elena looked at him. "Neither is stealing someone's work." One of the investors shifted uncomfortably. Vivian immediately said, "No one stole anything." Elena tilted her head. "You're nervous." Vivian's face tightened. "You're imagining things because of your condition." "My condition didn't create the documents." She placed a folder on the table. Vivian stared at it. Elena continued. "I requested copies of every file connected to the Haven project. Her father looked at Vivian. How did you get those? Vivian didn't answer. Elena opened the folder. Here is my original design submission. She placed another document beside it. And here is the version Vivian presented. The investors compared them. The similarities were obvious. One investor asked, why was the designer's name removed? Her father cleared his throat. This is a family company. We were restructuring responsibilities. Elena nodded, then explained this. She placed a third document on the table. It was an email. The sender was Vivian. The message had been sent to an outside developer 2 months earlier. If the Haven design succeeds, Elena won't need to be involved. She can be given a small consulting fee afterward. The room went silent. Vivian's face went pale. That email is out of context. Elena didn't argue. She simply said, then give them the context. Vivian couldn't, because there wasn't one. Her father looked furious. Where did you get this? I asked the company records department. You had no right. I am the original designer. You are also my daughter. Elena's expression changed. No. Her voice was quiet. That's exactly why you thought you could do this. Her father slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Elena didn't move. For years, that voice would have made her shrink. This time, she stayed still. The investors eventually left. Vivian followed them. Her father remained behind. He looked at Elena. You're destroying this family. Elena answered softly. No, I'm just refusing to carry it anymore. She turned and walked out. I followed her into the hallway. You were incredible. She stopped. Don't. I stopped too. Don't praise me now. Why? Because I don't need someone to tell me I'm brave after spending years telling me to be quiet. I lowered my head. She continued walking. That afternoon, Elena received a call from an unknown number. It was from a professor at a university in another city. Mr. Hale had apparently sent her designs to an urban sustainability research group. They wanted to meet her, not about the family company, about her work. Elena was suspicious. What do they want? The professor laughed. They want to know how you designed a low-cost cooling system that reduces energy use without expensive technology. Elena went silent. She had created that system 3 years earlier. She had never shown it to investors because she thought it wasn't ready. But apparently, someone had found it. The professor asked, did you know your design could be adapted for emergency housing? No. Well, we think it can. Elena sat down. For the first time since the accident, her face showed something other than exhaustion. Curiosity. Hope. She asked, what would you need from me? Your permission to test it. She looked through the window. Then she said, yes. When she hung up, she looked at me. They're interested in my work. I know. No. She shook her head. You don't understand. She smiled. They're interested in me. I smiled back. And that was the first time I saw the woman I had married beginning to return. But this time, she wasn't returning to me. She was returning to herself. 2 weeks later, Elena left the city. She took 3 suitcases, her drawings, and 1 old notebook from college. She left her wedding ring behind. She didn't take revenge. She didn't expose every secret. She simply walked away. Everyone assumed she'd come back when she calmed down. Her father told Vivian, she'll realize she needs us. Vivian agreed. My mother-in-law told me, give her time. Even I once believed she might return. But Elena had discovered something the rest of us hadn't. The accident hadn't given her a supernatural gift. It had given her something much more ordinary. The ability to finally hear what people had been saying all along. And once you hear the truth clearly, it's very difficult to go back to loving a lie. Elena moved to a coastal city 300 miles away. She rented a room above an old bookstore and began working with the university research group. For the first month, nothing was easy. She had no family around her, no husband, no familiar office, no expensive equipment, and no one there cared that she came from the Vale family. They only cared whether her ideas worked. The first prototype failed. The second leaked. The third overheated. On the 4th attempt, Elena sat on the laboratory floor and stared at the broken model. I think I'm an idiot, she said. Professor Hale laughed. You're an architect. What's the difference? Architects are just idiots with better drawings. She laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I had heard from her in weeks. I only knew because she called me that night. It was the first time she'd called since leaving. I almost dropped my phone. Hello. Hi. Her voice was different. Lighter. How are you? Better. That's good. There was an awkward silence. Then she asked, how are you? I looked around our empty house. Learning. She didn't ask what I meant. Maybe she understood. I wanted to tell her I missed her. Instead, I asked about the project. She talked for 20 minutes. The prototype, the research, the possibility of using her cooling system in low-income housing. She sounded alive. When the call ended, I sat alone in the dark. For years, I had thought being her husband meant being the center of her world. Now I understood that love wasn't supposed to be a cage with comfortable furniture. Meanwhile, back home, things are getting worse. The investors who had initially loved Haven began asking questions. They discovered Elena had not authorized Vivian to replace her name. They discovered several financial projections had been altered. And then they discovered something even more serious. The family company had submitted Elena's design to a government sustainability grant under Vivian's name. That could have been a legal disaster. My father-in-law blamed Vivian. Vivian blamed the accounting department. The accounting department produced emails proving Vivian had approved the submissions. Suddenly, the family that had always presented itself as united began turning on itself. I stayed out of it. For once, I didn't try to fix them. One evening, Vivian called me. Where is she? Elena. Who else? I don't know. You talk to her. Sometimes. You need to tell her to come back. I almost laughed. Why? Because this is getting out of control. I looked at the rain outside. Maybe it should. What does that mean? It means you should deal with what you did. She went quiet. Then she said, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. No, you don't. If Elena doesn't return, Dad is going to lose the company. That isn't Elena's responsibility. She is family. I closed my eyes. You stopped calling her family when you decided her work belonged to you. Vivian hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. 3 months passed. Then Elena's research team produced their first successful prototype. It was ugly. A simple modular wall system combined with passive ventilation channels and a low-cost reflective material. But it worked. It reduced indoor temperature dramatically without expensive air conditioning. The university posted a short article about it. A journalist noticed. Then another. Soon Elena was being invited to conferences. She hated public speaking, but she went anyway. At one conference, she stood on stage in front of hundreds of people. Someone asked, what inspired the design? Elena paused. Then she said, a problem my family didn't think was worth solving. The clip went viral within days. My phone filled with messages. Friends, former colleagues, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone suddenly wanted to know Elena. Her father saw the article too. He stared at the photograph for a long time. She looks different, he said. Vivian answered bitterly, she's still my sister. Her father shook his head. No. He looked at the screen again. She looks like someone who doesn't need us. That was the first time fear entered the family. Not anger, not embarrassment. Fear. Because Elena was no longer the daughter waiting for approval. She was becoming someone the world was beginning to value independently. But the biggest surprise hadn't arrived yet. 6 months after the accident, Elena received an email from an international housing foundation. They had studied her prototype. They wanted to fund a pilot community. 200 families, 200 homes, and they wanted Elena to lead the design. She called me that night. I got it. I smiled. I knew you would. She laughed. I didn't. You should start. Start what? Believing yourself. She became quiet. Then she said, maybe I'm finally learning. You want to tell Harry loved her? I didn't, because I was beginning to understand something else. Sometimes loving someone means refusing to ask them to return to a place where they were smaller. The project took almost a year. There were delays, funding problems, construction mistakes, arguments with contractors. One shipment of materials arrived completely damaged. Elena nearly gave up twice. But every time she wanted to quit, someone reminded her why the project mattered. One of those people was Daniel. He was the foundation's project manager. I met him only once through a video call. He was calm, practical, and completely unimpressed by Elena's family name. He cared about deadlines. He also seemed to care about Elena. At first, I noticed it because Elena mentioned him often. Daniel fixed the ventilation issue. Daniel stayed until midnight. Daniel thinks we should change the layout. I listened. Then one evening she said, he asked me to dinner. My chest tightened. I try to hide it. Are you going? I think so. I nodded. Good. She smiled. You sound like you're trying very hard to be mature. I am. You're terrible at it. I laughed. Fair. She went to dinner. Nothing dramatic happened. Daniel didn't declare his love. He simply listened. According to Elena, that was what surprised her. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell her what she should feel. He didn't compare her to anyone. He just listened. They started seeing each other slowly. There were no promises. No rushed romance. Just two people learning each other. Meanwhile, my marriage was ending in everything except paperwork. One afternoon, Elena sent me a message. I think we should finalize the divorce. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, okay. She called immediately. You're not angry? I am. She went quiet. But I don't want to hold you anymore. Her voice softened. I'm sorry. I know. I never wanted to hurt you. I know that too. But I did. Yes. Neither of us pretended otherwise. We signed the papers a month later. There was no courtroom drama. No shouting. No last-minute confession. Just two signatures. When Elena stood up, she looked at me. I hope you find peace. I smiled. I hope you stop needing permission to be happy. She nodded. Then she walked away. That should have been the end. But life had other plans. 2 weeks later, the International Foundation announced the pilot community publicly. The project was called Haven North. The design was Elena's. The funding was secured. The construction contract was awarded. And the foundation named Elena its lead design director. The announcement included a photograph of her standing beside the first completed house. She looked confident, not arrogant, not transformed into someone unrecognizable, just certain. The photograph reached her father's office. He stared at it for several minutes. Then he asked Vivian, how much would it cost us to license this technology? Vivian looked at him. Why? Because our company needs it. You want to approach Elena? I want to approach her professionally. Vivian laughed bitterly. She'll never agree. Her father didn't answer. But 3 days later, he sent Elena a formal proposal. She declined within 20 minutes. Then he tried personally. He called her. She answered. Elena, Dad, I'd like to discuss a business opportunity. She almost smiled. Of course you would. We could make this very successful together. We already did. What? We could have made it successful together. He went silent. You chose not to. He tried to defend himself. I thought Vivian was more prepared. Elena's voice remained calm. You weren't wrong about one thing. What? Vivian was prepared. He relaxed slightly. Prepared for what? To take what wasn't hers. The call ended. That evening, Elena told Daniel what happened. He didn't tell her what to do. He simply asked, how do you feel? She thought about it. Sad. Because you miss him? No. She looked toward the construction site. Because I finally understand that I spent years trying to earn love from someone who had already decided what I was worth. Daniel took her hand. You don't have to earn it from me. Elena looked at him. I know. And that was why she trusted him. Not because he rescued her. Because he never tried to own her. Months later, Haven North welcomed its first families. Children ran through the new streets. Parents opened windows and felt cool air move through rooms that had once been impossible to keep comfortable. Elena stood at the center of it all, watching, smiling, and somewhere far away, the people who had once dismissed her were beginning to realize the truth. They hadn't lost a daughter. They hadn't lost a wife. They hadn't lost an employee. They had lost someone who had spent years giving them chances they never deserved. And now, for the first time, Elena had stopped giving them any. By the second year after the accident, Elena's name had become bigger than the family name she once carried. Haven North was no longer a single pilot community. There were projects in 4 cities, then 7. The cooling system she had once sketched on our dining table had become a registered technology, and the foundation had created a new division around it. Elena became its creative director. She still called herself an architect. She still hated interviews. And she still forgot to eat when she was working. Some things never changed, but she had changed in the ways that mattered. She no longer apologized before speaking. She no longer asked whether an idea was too ambitious. And when someone interrupted her in a meeting, she didn't become quiet. She simply waited, then finished what she had been saying. I knew because sometimes those meetings were streamed online. I watched one late at night. A young architect presented a proposal. An investor interrupted him. He stopped. Elena looked at the investor. Let him finish. The room became silent. The investor nodded. The young architect continued. I smiled at the screen. That was my Elena, not the woman who had become powerful. The woman who had finally learned that kindness didn't require surrender. Meanwhile, my own life had become quieter. After the divorce, I left the family company. I started a small consulting firm helping independent designers negotiate contracts. It wasn't glamorous, but I understood something I hadn't understood before. A lot of talented people weren't defeated by lack of ability. They were defeated because they trusted the wrong people. I wanted to help them avoid that. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from Elena's assistant. Mr. Vale? Yes. Elena wants to know if you're available next month. For what? She'd like you to attend the opening of the first public haven school. I was silent. Does she need me there? No. The answer surprised me. Then why invite me? She said you should see what the original dining table sketches became. I smiled. I'll be there. The opening was held on a bright Saturday morning. Hundreds of people attended. Children carried paper models of houses. Local officials gave speeches. Journalists photographed Elena. Daniel stood beside her. They were together by then. It was obvious in the small things. The way he passed her water before she asked. The way she reached for his hand without thinking. I didn't feel jealousy. Not anymore. I felt something closer to gratitude. She had found someone who didn't need her to become smaller, so he could feel important. After the ceremony, Elena found me near the back of the crowd. You came. You invited me. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. She smiled. I know. We walked toward the school building. It looked nothing like the expensive developments my former in-laws used to build. It was simple, bright, efficient. Every classroom had natural ventilation. The walls were designed to stay cool. The roof collected rainwater. Children could study without sitting beneath noisy, expensive machines. Elena touched one of the walls. This is the part one dreamed about. I looked at her. Not the awards? No. She smiled. The children. We stood quietly. Then she said, Dad wants to see me. I wasn't surprised. Did you agree? Yes. Why? Because I'm ready. Her voice was calm. I used to think closure meant making people admit they were wrong. She looked at the children playing outside. Now I think closure means being able to sit across from them without needing anything from them. That evening, she met her father. I wasn't there. But later, she told me what happened. He had aged. The company had suffered after the Haven scandal. Investors had withdrawn. The grand issue had resulted in a legal settlement. Vivian had left the company after an internal investigation uncovered additional unauthorized transfers. No dramatic prison sentence. No public humiliation. Just consequences. Contracts were lost. Reputation damaged. The company survived, but became much smaller. Her father looked at Elena and said, I was wrong. She waited. He continued, I thought I was protecting the company. You were protecting your idea of the family. He nodded. I know. Do you? Yes. He looked down. I treated you like someone who needed to be managed. Elena said nothing. I didn't understand what you were capable of. She answered quietly. That was never my responsibility. Her father looked at her. Can you forgive me? Elena took a breath. Yes. His eyes filled with tears. Then she added, but forgiveness doesn't mean I can become the daughter you wanted again. He nodded. I understand. And for the first time, he did. Vivian was harder. She didn't apologize. Not immediately. She blamed pressure. She blamed their father. She blamed the investors. She even blamed Elena for leaving. You abandoned us, she said during their first meeting. Elena stared at her. I left after you took my work. You could have stayed. You wanted me to stay? Vivian hesitated. No. Elena nodded. That is what I thought. Vivian looked away. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Vivian said, Do you know what was worst? Elena waited. Everyone thought you were the better one. Elena's expression hardened. I never wanted to compete with you. I know. You just wanted me to. Vivian swallowed. I was jealous. I know. And when you left, I thought you'd come back. Elena smiled sadly. So did I. What changed? Elena looked at her sister. I heard you. Vivian frowned. What does that mean? After the accident, I could hear things differently. She touched her ear. Not thoughts, not magic, just the things people try to hide. Vivian stared at her. I heard the fear in Dad's voice when he realized the investors were leaving. She paused. I heard the excitement in yours when you thought the project would make you important. Vivian looked down. And I heard myself, Elena continued. I realized how often I stayed silent because I was afraid of losing people. Her voice softened. So I stopped. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. I wish you'd told me. I did. When? Every time I asked you to stop. Vivian had no answer. That was the end of their conversation. Not reconciliation, not hatred, just truth. Elena didn't invite Vivian into her new life. She didn't need to. Some doors could be closed without being slammed. A week later, something unexpected happened. I received an invitation to Elena and Daniel's engagement dinner. I stared at the message for nearly a minute. I didn't know whether going would be appropriate. Then Elena called. Are you coming? I don't want to make things uncomfortable. You won't. You're sure? Yes. I smiled. Then I'll come. At the dinner, Daniel shook my hand. I'm glad you're here. So am I. We both laughed. Elena came out of the kitchen carrying a tray. She looked at us. Are you two becoming friends? Daniel said, We're discussing how difficult you are. Elena rolled her eyes. You see what I deal with. I laughed. For a moment, it felt strange. This man had become the person beside her. But it didn't hurt. Because I finally understood the difference between losing someone and losing your place in someone's life. I had lost the marriage, but I hadn't lost the years. Those years had taught me who I was when love wasn't enough. After dinner, Elena walked me outside. The city lights reflected across the river. She said, Do you regret marrying me? No. She looked surprised. Even after everything, especially after everything. She smiled. I don't regret marrying you either. That answer mattered more than I expected. We stood there quietly. Then she said, You know what I remember most about us? The noodles? She laughed. Of course you remember the noodles. You said they weren't romantic. They weren't. But you married me. I did. We both smiled. Then she looked toward the river. I think we loved each other the best way we knew how. I nodded. And sometimes the best way isn't enough. No. She took a breath. But it doesn't make it meaningless. I understood. We didn't need to rewrite the past. We only needed to stop living inside it. Months later, Elena and Daniel married in a small ceremony. No luxury hotel. No business executives. No family spectacle. Just friends, researchers, architects, children from Haven communities, and the people who had watched Elena rebuild herself. I wasn't part of the ceremony. I was a guest. And that was exactly where I belonged. After the wedding, Elena sent me one photograph. She and Daniel were standing outside their new home. The design was simple. A wide window, a small garden, a roof built around the same cooling principles that had changed her career. Under the photograph, she wrote, I finally built the home I used to draw. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I replied, You always knew how. You just needed people to stop telling you that you couldn't. She sent back a heart. That was all. For the first time, I didn't wish for more. And that was when I knew the divorce had truly ended. Not when the papers were signed. Not when she married Daniel. But when I could see her happiness and feel no desire to reclaim it. The strange gift from the accident had never really been the ability to hear lies. It had been the courage to stop living by them. And Elena wasn't the only one who learned that lesson. I was learning it too. Because sometimes the person who walks away isn't the one who loses. Sometimes walking away is the first honest thing two people do for each other. 3 years after Elena's accident, Haven had become something none of us had imagined. Not a company, not just a housing program, a movement. Universities were teaching the design principles. Cities were using modified versions of the cooling system. Young architects were studying Elena's work. And Elena herself had become the kind of person who received invitations from people who once wouldn't return her calls. But success brought one final test. The foundation wanted to commercialize Haven internationally. That meant money. A lot of it. Investors arrived with impressive suits and even more impressive promises. One group offered Elena a controlling partnership. Another wanted exclusive rights. A third promised to turn Haven into a luxury brand. Elena rejected all three. Daniel asked her why. She smiled. Because I remember where this started. With a broken prototype? With a family that thought poor people didn't matter. Daniel laughed. You're impossible. So I've been told. But one proposal was different. A major construction corporation offered to fund thousands of Haven homes. The agreement looked perfect until Elena noticed one clause. The company could modify the designs without her approval. She refused. The board questioned her decision. You're leaving billions on the table. Elena didn't move. Then leave them there. One board member said, You're allowing emotion to interfere with business. Elena answered, No, I'm allowing ethics to interfere with greed. The meeting ended badly. For the first time since becoming successful, Elena was uncertain. Not about herself, about whether success was forcing her to become the kind of person she had spent years escaping. That night, she called me. I need advice. I smiled. That's dangerous. I know. She told me about the contract. I listened. Then I asked, what would the Elena from 10 years ago do? She laughed softly. She'd sign it because she was afraid of losing the opportunity. And what does today's Elena want? She wants control. Then you already know. There was silence. Thank you, she said. For what? For not telling me what to do. I smiled. I'm learning. The next morning, Elena rejected the offer. The board threatened to remove her. She resigned instead. The news shocked everyone. People online called her foolish. Analysts said she had thrown away a fortune. Former colleagues wondered whether she had finally lost her mind. Even her father called. You've spent years building this. I know. And now you're walking away? No. She smiled. I'm walking towards something else. She announced the creation of an independent nonprofit, Haven Commons. Its purpose was simple: design affordable housing without surrendering the rights of the communities that used it. The idea seemed impossible, but Elena had learned something from failure. Impossible did not mean worthless. She began again, this time with fewer resources. No giant corporate sponsor, no family money, no powerful company behind her. Just her reputation, her knowledge, and a group of people who believed in her. Daniel stayed beside her, but he didn't rescue her. He worked his own job and helped when she asked. That mattered to Elena. She had spent too many years confusing dependence with love. Now she knew better. Then, the unexpected happened. Her father approached Haven Commons. Not as an investor, as a volunteer advisor. Elena was suspicious. You don't have to prove anything to me. He nodded. I know. Then why are you here? He looked at the plans on the table. Because I spent my life building things for people who already had enough. He touched one of the drawings. I want to help build something for people who don't. Elena didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said, You can advise. He smiled faintly. That's all. That's all. He nodded. I'll take it. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was real. And real was better than pretending. Vivian also changed. She had left the family company and started working in nonprofit finance. She wasn't suddenly transformed into Elena's best friend. Their relationship remained complicated. But once a year, Vivian sent Elena a message. Sometimes it was only, I hope you're doing well. Elena always answered, I am. I hope you are too. That was enough. Then came the final shock. A journalist investigating the old family company contacted Elena. He had found records showing that her father hadn't originally planned to replace her. Vivian had secretly convinced him. But there was another person involved. Someone none of us suspected. The company's former chief financial officer had been manipulating the project from the beginning. He had encouraged the family conflict because he wanted control over the company's new technology division. Vivian had been ambitious. Her father had been biased, but the CFO had been exploiting both. The discovery didn't erase what Vivian had done. It didn't erase what her father had done, but it explained why the betrayal had spread so quickly. Elena read the documents quietly. Then she closed the file. Do you want to expose him? Daniel asked. She thought for a moment. No, Why? Because I don't need to. She handed the documents to the investigators. Let the truth do what it does. And it did. The former CFO was investigated for financial misconduct. The company cooperated. Several old transactions were reviewed. The remaining business leadership changed. For Elena, it was no longer personal. That was the biggest sign of how far she had come. A year later, Haven Commons opened its largest project. 500 families moved into homes designed around Elena's original principles. The opening ceremony was smaller than the one before. No celebrity guests, no luxury branding, just families, children, teachers, workers, architects, and Elena. She stood on a small stage and looked at the crowd. I was there too, not as her husband, not as her former husband's family, just as one of the people who had watched the journey. A little girl stepped onto the stage. She was about 8 years old. Are you the person who designed my house? Elena smiled. Part of it. Can I be an architect too? Elena crouched beside her. You could be anything you work for. The girl frowned. My dad says girls don't need to design buildings. Elena looked at the father. He immediately looked embarrassed. Then Elena smiled at the child. Your dad is allowed to be wrong. The crowd laughed. The girl smiled. So I can. Yes. The little girl hugged her. Elena closed her eyes. For a moment, I saw the woman from years ago. The one who had spread sketches across our dining table. The one who had asked me whether her dream was too ambitious. She had finally built it. Not for her father. Not for Vivian. Not for me. For herself. After the ceremony, I found her sitting alone beneath a tree. You disappeared, I said. I was hiding. From journalists? From people who want speeches. I laughed. She looked at me. You're doing well. I am. Happy. I thought about it. Yes. It was true. My consulting firm had grown. I worked with young designers. I had friends I trusted. I traveled. I learned how to enjoy quiet mornings. I had even started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but I was open to it. Elena smiled. I'm glad. So am I. She looked toward the new houses. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't had the accident? I considered the question. Sometimes. What do you think? I think you would have eventually left. She looked at me. Really? Maybe not that year. I smiled sadly. Maybe not for 5 years. She nodded. But eventually, she looked at the houses. I think you're right. The accident had not created Elena's strength. It had revealed how much strength had been buried under fear. The strange hearing sensitivity had eventually faded. Her doctors had been right. It wasn't permanent. But by then, she didn't need it anymore. She had learned to recognize hesitation. She had learned to notice patterns. She had learned to trust herself. That was the impossible gift. Not hearing lies. Hearing herself. That evening, I received a message from my former mother-in-law. She wanted to meet. I almost refused. Then I thought about Elena's father. About forgiveness. About closure. So I agreed. We met at a small cafe. She looked older. Tired. She apologized before ordering. I failed both of you. I didn't interrupt. I thought keeping the family together mattered more than anything. She looked at me. I was wrong. You were afraid. Yes. I nodded. She started crying. I keep thinking if I had defended Elena once, everything would be different. Maybe. She wiped her eyes. But you can't live in that sentence. She looked at me. What do you mean? You can't spend the rest of your life asking what would have happened. She nodded slowly. Does Elena hate us? No. Does she forgive us? Yes. Then why won't she come back? I answered honestly. Because forgiveness isn't an invitation. She looked down. I know. When I left the cafe, I felt lighter. Not because I had fixed anything. Because I finally understood that not everything needed to be fixed. Some relationships were meant to end. Some mistakes were meant to remain lessons. And some people were meant to become memories rather than companions. That night, I received a photograph from Elena. It was a picture of the 500th family receiving the keys to their new home. Under it, she wrote, I used to think home was a person. A second message arrived. Now I know home is the place where you don't have to disappear to be loved. I stared at those words. Then I smiled, because once I had been part of the place where she disappeared. Now I was grateful she had found somewhere better. Months later, Elena and Daniel announced they were expecting a child. The news reached me through a mutual friend. I felt something unexpected. Not sadness, not jealousy, joy. I sent Elena one message. Congratulations. That child is going to have an incredible mother. She replied almost immediately. And you would have been an incredible father too. I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. But I think our lives turned out the way they needed to. I smiled. I think so too. For years, I had believed the greatest loss of my life was losing my wife. I was wrong. The greatest loss would have been keeping her and watching her lose herself. Sometimes love ends because two people stop loving each other. Sometimes it ends because one person finally learns how to love themselves. And when that happens, the right response isn't to hold tighter. It's to let go. Because the person who walks away may not be abandoning you. They may finally be choosing to live. 5 years after Elena's accident, I received an invitation that I never expected. It came from Haven Commons. The invitation was for the opening of a new research and housing center. The building was named after Elena's mother. I almost didn't go. Then I saw the final line. Elena asked that you attend. So I went. The center stood at the edge of a growing neighborhood, surrounded by trees and small houses. At the entrance was a bronze plaque. It described the project's purpose, its technology, and the people who had helped create it. My name wasn't there. I was glad. I hadn't built it. Elena had. I walked inside. The lobby was crowded. Researchers, architects, students, families, children running between adults. Then I saw her. Elena stood near a large window, holding a little girl's hand. Her daughter. The child was 4 years old and had Elena's eyes. Daniel stood beside them. When Elena saw me, she smiled. I'm glad you came. So am I. She introduced me to her daughter. This is someone who believed in my drawings before anyone else did. The little girl looked at me seriously. Did you help Mommy? I smiled. Sometimes. Elena laughed. He brought me noodles. The girl looked impressed. Were they good? No. Elena and I said together. We laughed. For a few seconds, everything felt strangely peaceful. Then Elena said, There's something I want to show you. She led me upstairs. The final room was a small exhibition. On one wall were her earliest sketches, the original Haven drawings, the first prototype, photographs from the first construction site, and in the center was an old notebook. I recognized it immediately. Her college notebook, the one she'd taken when she left the city after the accident. You kept it? She nodded. I found something inside it. She opened to a page near the back. There's a sketch of a small house. Underneath, Elena had written, A home should make people feel safe enough to become themselves. I stared at it. When did you write this? Before we met. I looked at her. She smiled. I forgot about it. I remembered something. The first night, we'd eaten noodles. The first sketch she'd shown me. The first time she'd told me she wanted to design affordable homes. All those years ago, the dream had already existed. The accident hadn't created it. Her family hadn't created it. I hadn't created it. It had always been hers. We stood quietly. Then Elena said, I used to think you were the only person who believed in me. I lowered my eyes. I wasn't. No. She shook her head. I just thought you were. She touched the notebook. The truth is, I didn't believe in myself. She smiled. And that's what I'm most grateful for now. I looked at her. What? That I finally became someone I could trust. Those words stayed with me. Because that was the real ending to our story. Not the divorce. Not the success. Not the new marriage. Trust. Not trust in another person. Trust in yourself. Later that evening, Elena's father approached me. We hadn't spoken in years. He looked older than I remembered. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't owe me one. I do. He looked toward Elena. I should have treated her differently. Yes. He nodded. I thought success was protecting what we had. What did you think you were protecting? He smiled sadly. Control. I appreciated the honesty. Then at least you understand now. He looked at me. Did I lose her? I thought carefully. No. He looked surprised. She isn't lost. Then what is she? Free. He looked toward his daughter. Tears filled his eyes. I suppose that's better. It is. He nodded. Then he walked away. I watched him approach Elena. This time, he didn't tell her what to do. He simply hugged her. She hugged him back. Not because the past had disappeared. Because she no longer needed to carry it. The next morning, I left the center before sunrise. I walked through the neighborhood alone. The streets were quiet. A few lights were turning on in the houses. Children's bicycles rested beside doors. Someone was making breakfast. A woman opened a window. Cool morning air moved through the room. I stopped and smiled. I thought about the accident, the hospital, the ring on the bedside table, the stolen designs, the lies, the divorce, the first failed prototype, the first house, the first time Elena stood on a stage and refused to apologize for being ambitious. I thought about the strange gift that had changed everything. For a while, I had believed it was a curse. Elena had believed the same. She could hear a person's heartbeat change when they lied. She could hear fear hiding beneath confident words. She could hear hesitation. But eventually, she realized she didn't need the ability anymore, because the world had taught her something more valuable. People reveal themselves through patterns. You don't need supernatural hearing to recognize betrayal. You only need to stop making excuses for it. I returned home later that morning. My apartment was small, quiet, mine. On the kitchen table sat a sketch from one of the young designers I mentored. She had asked me to review it the night before. I opened my laptop and began working. My life wasn't extraordinary. I wasn't famous. I hadn't become rich. But I liked my life. That mattered. For years, I had measured happiness by whether someone stayed. Now I measured it by whether I could wake up without fear of losing myself. A few weeks later, I met someone. Her name was Mara. She worked in community education. We met because she was helping one of the design teams develop training programs for local schools. She knew Elena's work. She didn't know I had been married to her. When she eventually found out, she asked one question. Are you still in love with her? I thought about it. Yes. Mara looked surprised. With me? I smiled. Not in the way you mean. I explained. She was part of my life. I don't need to hate her to move forward. Mara nodded. And what do you want now? I answered honestly. A life where both people can grow without being afraid of each other. She smiled. That sounds reasonable. I've become very reasonable. She laughed. You've become boring. Probably. We started dating. Slowly. No promises we couldn't keep. No pretending. No rescuing. Just two people learning each other's boundaries. And I discovered something Elena had already learned. Peace can feel unfamiliar when you've spent years confusing chaos with passion. Months passed. Then one afternoon, I received a package from Elena. Inside was a framed copy of her original dining table sketch. On the back, she had written, "For the person who believed before I did." I put it above my desk. Not because I wanted the past back, because I wanted to remember what it taught me. A few years earlier, I thought my greatest failure was not fighting hard enough for my marriage. Now I understood the truth. My greatest failure had been believing that keeping Elena beside me was more important than helping her become herself. I couldn't undo that. Neither could she undo what happened. But we could choose what the past meant. It didn't have to mean wasted years. It could mean growth. It could mean forgiveness. It could mean knowing when to stay and knowing when to leave. One evening, Elena called. How are you? Good. Really? Really? And Mara? I smiled. She says I'm boring. Elena laughed. She sounds intelligent. She is. There was a pause. Then Elena said, Daniel and I are coming to your city next month. For work? Yes. Want coffee? Of course. When we met, we sat at the same kind of small cafe where we'd once signed our divorce papers. But this time there was no sadness. Daniel and Mara joined us. We talked for hours. About work. About children. About terrible food. About architecture. About life. At one point, Elena looked at me. I think we did okay. I smiled. We did better than okay. She nodded. Then she said something that closed the final door between our past and our present. I don't hate what happened anymore. Neither do I. Even the accident. I looked at her. I hate that you had to suffer. She nodded. But I don't hate who you became. She smiled. I don't either. We raised our coffee cups. Not a toast to getting back together. A toast to surviving what we had been. Years later, people would ask Elena about the impossible gift. Journalists wanted the dramatic version. They wanted to know how the accident gave her extraordinary hearing. They wanted the medical mystery. They wanted the scandal. Sometimes she told them. But whenever someone asked what the accident really gave her, she answered differently. It gave me a reason to listen. Then they would ask, listen to what? And Elena would smile. To myself. That was the truth. The accident had exposed everyone around her. Her sister's jealousy, her father's control, her mother's fear, my weakness, her own insecurity. But exposure alone wasn't enough. The real miracle was what Elena did afterward. She didn't destroy the people who betrayed her. She didn't spend her life proving them wrong. She didn't become cruel. She simply stopped asking them to tell her who she was. She built. She failed. She tried again. She loved again. She became a mother. She became a mentor. She created homes for people who had never believed they could afford one. And eventually, she became the person she had been trying to find in everyone else. Herself. As for me, I learned my own lesson. The greatest revenge isn't watching someone regret losing you. It isn't success. It isn't making them beg. It isn't returning years later so they can see what they missed. The greatest revenge is waking up one morning and realizing you no longer need revenge. You don't need them to apologize. You don't need them to understand. You don't need them to regret. You don't even need them to remember, because your life has become full enough without their permission. Elena once told me that a home was the place where you didn't have to disappear to be loved. I finally understood what she meant. Home isn't always a person. Sometimes home is the life you build after you stop abandoning yourself. And sometimes walking away isn't the end of a love story. Sometimes it's the moment the story finally becomes yours.